So there's a ruler, okay? There's a ruler, and the ruler sends two of his servants, okay? Two of his servants to settle on these royal farms because the ruler is powerful. He has a lot of wealth. So he sends two of the servants to settle on these royal farms that he has. Okay, these royal farms. And before he sends them off, he gives both of them 24 pieces of gold. He gives them 24 pieces of gold. Now, the first servants, when he reaches when he's on his journey, he ends up using a very small amount of his money. So he has 24 pieces of gold, and he only uses a very small amount. And the key word to remember here is investment. It's going to be an important video. It's going to be an important term in our video. He invests a very small amount. He invests a very small amount of the money he has. Okay? And because he invests only a very small amount, his capital actually increases 1,000-fold. And the rest of the money, he doesn't waste it. But the second servant does not act so wisely. Okay? What the second servant does is he actually just ends up wasting most of his money. Okay, so he had 24 pieces, he ends up wasting 23 pieces. He ends up wasting 23 of the 24 pieces he was given. Okay, he gambles it away on like entertainment, okay, on just pleasures, okay? And the two servants, they're going to go to these royal farms, right? That's the destination. Before they reach the royal farms, they need to, board a train or like an airplane or, a boat at the station. They're going to get a ticket. They're going to buy a ticket. And then, boarding some form of transportation, they're going to reach the royal farms. And so the two servants, they finally reach the station. And, one of the servants, he hadn't wasted his money. He only spent a small amount and his capital increased. But the other servant, he just gambled it away. Okay? So the first servant tells him, look, you only have one piece left. You have 24 pieces, but you wasted it. Now you only have one piece left. So here's what you should do. Spend that final piece you have on buying yourself a ticket. Because if you don't buy yourself a ticket, right, then you can't like board a train, for example, or an airplane, and you'll be forced to trek across the scorching desert. And it'll take you 2 months. And it would be really foolish if this servant who wasted all this money were to waste that final piece he also had on fleeting pleasures. Okay? So what does this story represent? Well, we're going to look at that in the next paragraph that we're going to read from the Risale-i. Okay? So, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. So it says here, the ticket in the comparison represents the prescribed prayers. So there's a ticket, right? They need a ticket to board a train or a plane in order to reach the royal farms. So the ticket, this tafsir is saying that the ticket is the prescribed prayers. Okay? The prescribed prayers. So Muslims pray 5 times a day. The ticket here represents the prescribed prayers. Okay? The prayers that God commands us to perform. Okay? And the royal farm, okay, the royal farms represents paradise. So this tafsir is telling us that the ticket to entering paradise, okay, heaven, is by performing the prescribed prayers. Okay, the prescribed prayers form the cornerstone of worship. And it's through performing the prescribed prayers that we're able to attain paradise. Okay, but it's important to keep in mind here that paradise is not just in the afterlife, okay? So paradise is not just in the afterlife. Paradise can also be in this life, okay? It can also be in this life as well, not just in the afterlife. So here's what I mean. By performing worship and by believing in God, by submitting to Him, we can be happy in this life. And we can turn this life into a sort of paradise, okay? So by performing the prescribed prayers, remember it's the cornerstone of worship. So by performing the prescribed prayers, our life, we can end up making this life paradise and the next life paradise. Okay, paradise is not just in the afterlife. And paradise is not just in the afterlife. Okay? Now, if we continue on, it says in this next sentence, a single hour a day is sufficient for the 5 prayers together with taking the ablutions. So Muslims pray 5 times a day. Okay? So we pray 5 times a day, and that might sound like a lot to some people. 5 times a day. Okay. Now that might sound like a lot. Okay, but actually, if you combine all the prescribed prayers within the day, and also the ablutions you take, right? So to purify yourself, you wash your arms and your face and your feet and whatnot. If you combine it, it only actually takes up an hour of your day. It only takes up 1 hour. So you have 24 hours in a day. Performing the prescribed prayers only takes up 1 hour of your time. Only 1 hour. Okay, so it's not a lot, actually. And the Risale-i is continuing going on to say that so what a loss a person makes who spends 23 hours on this fleeting worldly life and fails to spend 1 hour on the long life of the hereafter, how he wrongs his own self, how unreasonably he behaves. So, just like this, remember, what does the second servant do? So the first servant, he only uses a small amount of his money, right? He invests it, and he retains the other golden pieces he has. He doesn't waste it. But the other servant, the second servant, he gambles it away, okay? So if we waste our time in this world, okay, so if we waste 23 hours of our day, okay, just on fleeting pleasures on this world, and we don't spend even 1 hour on the afterlife, so not even 1 hour performing the prescribed prayers, this is a very big loss, and we're also wronging ourselves. So how is this a loss, and how are we wronging ourselves? Well, for 2 reasons. Okay, it's for 2 reasons. So very simply to put it, hell and heaven. Hell and heaven. These are the 2 reasons. So let me elaborate. With hell, if you don't perform the prescribed prayers, if you don't believe in God, then your life will, so if you don't believe in God, if you don't worship Him, if you don't obey Him, your life will turn into hell. Because hell is not just in the afterlife. Hell can also be in this life. It can also be in this life if you don't believe in God, if you don't worship Him. Okay? Hell can also be in this life. Okay? Now, think about it like this. So, imagine you don't believe in God. You don't believe in afterlife. You don't believe in anything. Okay? Your vision of the world is going to be extremely bleak if you don't have belief. Okay? If you don't worship God. Because think about it like this. First of all, your life has no purpose. Okay? Any purpose that you set for yourself is superficial and unsatisfactory. Okay? Any suffering that you experience in this life is meaningless. There's no wisdom behind it. There's no reason behind it. And then, like when you're young, you don't really think about it. But once you hit your 40s and you're in that midlife crisis, then you realize that death is actually a reality. And, your loved ones, right, your friends and your family members, they start dying. And once again, in your bleak perspective, devoid of belief, when they die, they become nothing. They perish into non-existence. Okay? And one day, you're also going to die, you're also going to become nothing, and you're going to be eternally separated from them. Now, I know I've just portrayed something really bleak, but this is the reality of disbelief. When you don't have belief and when you don't worship God, this is how you will see the world. It is extremely negative, okay? And so, if this is the belief that you have, right, if this is the vision you have of the world, your life will become hell, okay? You will be in a state of misery. So I'll actually give an example. My dad told me, this doctor told my dad once, so there was this doctor who worked at a hospital, and he noticed something really interesting about the patients who are Christian and then the patients who are atheists, okay? So the patients who are Christian, okay, so they adhere to Christianity, they were very relaxed. They were very relaxed. They weren't afraid of death because they thought, okay, well, when I die, Jesus is going to come take my soul. I'm going to attain eternal salvation. So the Christian patients, they were very relaxed. They weren't really afraid. They weren't really tense. But the patients who were atheists, okay, the patients who were atheists, they were in this constant state of terror. They were in a constant state of terror. And the reason for that is because they're afraid, when am I going to die? Because remember, for the atheist, there is no afterlife. There is no continuation. When you die, you die. That's it. It's done. It's done. Not coming back into this life again. There's no continuation. So, your vision, right, your belief impacts your vision of the world, okay? So, if you don't have belief, if you don't worship God, your life will turn into hell, okay? Hell will begin in this life, okay? And hell will also be in the afterlife, because God will punish you. God will punish you for your lack of belief, for your rebelliousness to Him. Now, the second major reason, right, is heaven, okay? Heaven can also be in this life, and it can also be in the next life, right? So if you do have belief, if you do have belief, and you do worship God, then you can be happy in this life. Oh my God. You can also be happy in this life. Your life can become a sort of paradise, and then you can also be happy in the next life. Because think about it. Think about it. When you have a belief, right? When you believe in God, when you believe in an afterlife, in resurrection, well, for example, like let's say your loved ones have died, you're going to reunite with them in the afterlife. You're not going to become nothing, right? You're not going to perish when you die and become nothing, okay? There's a wisdom, there's a reason behind the suffering that you experience in this life, okay? So, and you can also, there's a creator, there's someone who's watching over you that you can rely on, that you can ask his support for, that you can seek refuge in, okay? The universe is under the control of the supreme creator, okay? The Lord reigns supreme over the universe. It's not like that for the atheist. The atheist sees the universe in a state of anarchy. He sees the universe in a state of anarchy. That's not what it's like for the believer, okay? So with heaven, life can be both in this life and the afterlife. Okay, so this is really important to keep in mind. Now, the reason I talked about these two is that when you don't even spend 1 hour of your time performing the prescribed prayers, when you don't even spend 1 hour on the prescribed prayers, it's a very big loss, and you're also wronging yourself. It's a very big loss because not only are you deprived of happiness in this life and the next life, okay, you are also causing yourself misery in this life and the next life, okay? Now, I'm going to be saying something really interesting. So, there was something really interesting that occurred to me, okay? So, you know how, like, the Quran, not just the Quran, the other scriptures as well, they talk about divine punishment, right, in the afterlife. If you really think about it, the hellfire, when God throws some of us into the hellfire, He punishes some of us, the hellfire is actually a continuation. If you think about it, the hellfire is actually a continuation. Because, remember, if you don't have belief, if you disobey God, okay, you don't submit to Him, remember what happens is you end up becoming miserable in this life, okay? You end up becoming miserable in this life. Your life turns into a sort of hell. So when on the day of judgment, God condemns you to the hellfire, okay? That punishment that you are given, right, where you're sent to hell, it is actually a continuation. It is just a continuation of the suffering that you inflicted on yourself. Okay? So you self-inflicted pains, right? You inflicted pain, suffering on yourself by rejecting the message of God, by turning away from God, by not submitting to his religion, by not submitting to him. You ended up making yourself miserable in this life. You ended up turning this life into hell. And when you get punished with hell in the next life, it's just a continuation. It's just a continuation. God's like, I invited you to the message. I invited you to the message. Okay? I gave you an opportunity, a plenitude of opportunities to come to the truth, where you could be happy in this life and the next life, but you rejected it. Every single time you rejected it, you turned away. You wanted to follow your own whims, your own desires. You were disgusted every time I offered you an opportunity. You made this life of yours hell, and you know what? You're going to continue to be in hell, because that's the life that you chose for yourself. If you make this life for yourself, if you make this life into hell, then the next life will also be hell. You know, some people say, like, why would a benevolent creator throw people into hell? But they brought that upon themselves. They made that choice. They were the ones who said, I don't want to believe in God. I don't want to worship him. I don't want to do what he orders me to do. I'm just going to do what I want to do, okay? I'm just going to do my own thing, okay? And that person, he ends up causing himself misery. He ends up turning his life into hell. And when he goes to hell in the next life, it's just a continuation. That was his choice. He brought that upon himself. Okay? So continuing on, it says here, yes, for would not anyone who consider himself to be reasonable understand how contrary to reason and wisdom such a person's conduct is, and how far from reason he has become in thinking it reasonable. He gives half of his property to a lottery in which 1,000 people are participating, and the possibility of winning is 1 in 1,000, and does not give 1/24 of it to an eternal treasury where the possibility of winning has been verified 99 out of 100. Now, what's so extraordinary about this chapter is that it really shows the absurdity of neglecting the prescribed prayers, right? Just how just how unreasonable it is. Okay, so think about it like this. So, doing the lottery, competing in the lottery, it's forbidden in Islam. But some people obviously do it. Now the thing with the lottery is that your chances of winning are extremely slim. Okay, it's extremely slim because imagine there's 100 people participating. Okay, like 1,000 people, in fact. Your possibility of winning is only 1 out of 1,000. It's only 1 out of 1,000. But some people still compete in lotteries because I think their logic is, okay, well, let me put a small amount of money in the lottery. Maybe, let me compete in the lottery. Maybe I'll win. Okay, and then I'll get super rich and I'll end up buying a bunch of mansions and then live the life. I guess that's pretty much logic, but then again, I don't really know. But the thing is, your chances of winning are really slim. But imagine if you gave half of your property to the lottery. Imagine if you gave half of your property to the lottery. It's absurd because your possibility, you could win, but your chances of winning are extremely low. They're extremely low, okay? So it's really absurd to give half of your property to a lottery in which your chances of winning are low, okay? But what's even more absurd is if you did not spend even 1 hour out of your entire day, just 1 hour out of your entire day on the prescribed prayers, right? Working for the afterlife, okay? This is just very unreasonable, okay? And we talked about how like 1 hour out of 24. It's interesting because the servants each received 24 pieces of gold. Each of the servants received 24 pieces of gold. Well, human beings, every day we have, how many hours do we have in a day? We have 24 hours. 24 pieces of gold, 24 hours. The hours that we're given is compared to 24 pieces of gold. Our time is as valuable as gold. Why? Because first of all, our time is limited. Our time is extremely limited here, okay? And each and every one of us leaves this world at a certain time, okay? And time is our investment tool. So once again, that word investment. Time is our investment tool. How you invest your time is important. If you gamble it away, like the second servant, then you're going to become regretful, okay? It's going to be fruitless, non-beneficial. If you invest your time in the right things, okay, then you can reap the results of what you earn. I think that's what they say, right? So it will have a fruitful, a beneficial outcome, okay? It will have a beneficial outcome. So continuing on, it says here, moreover, the spirit, the heart, and the mind find great ease in prayer. So we talked about being happy in this life and the next, right? So the prescribed prayers, it's not just like a ritual that you do. It's like, okay, I mean, I don't really like praying, but when I do it, at least I'll be rewarded in the next life. It's not like that. The prescribed prayers also makes you happy in this life. Okay, so it says that with the prescribed prayers comes great ease. Great ease, right? Like ease means to be like relieved or relaxed. Okay, so especially when you're like suffering from something, you have like problems in life. Okay, and so when you pray, you feel at ease, you feel relaxed. Okay, whenever I ask someone, how do you feel when you pray? They tell me I feel tranquil, right? I feel hushur. Okay, I feel tranquility. Okay, and the reason for that is because when you're performing, well, there's obviously many reasons, but just some of the reasons when you're performing the prescribed prayers, you end up first of all securing your needs. Okay, you end up securing your needs, and you also fortify yourself from your enemies. And the other thing about the prescribed prayers is that it's a reminder to you, because sometimes we feel like we're just fighting a one-man we feel like a one-man army just fighting against all our problems in life. But when we perform the prescribed prayers, it reminds us that no, you're not alone. You're not alone. Okay, there is someone who's watching over you. There's someone who you can rely on, who you can whose support you can like rely on, right? Someone who can be of support to you, someone who can be of reliance to you. You're not alone in this world. Okay, once again, like remember, for example, for the disbeliever's perspective, he's all alone. Okay, he's a cosmic orphan because he has no creator. The universe is just in a state of anarchy. Okay, but it's not like that for the believer. Okay, he has his Lord who he can seek refuge in, who he can ask help from. Okay, and it says here, and it is not trying for the body. So the prescribed prayers, it's not very challenging. It's not very difficult. Okay, once again, it only takes up an hour of your day. Furthermore, with the right intention, all the other acts of someone who performs the prescribed prayers become like worship. So this is really interesting. When you perform the prescribed prayers, okay? So when we perform the prescribed prayers, all the other things that we do, okay, all of our other actions in this life turn into a form of worship, okay? It turns into a form of worship. Now, why is that? Why does that happen? Well, the reason that happens is because when we're performing the prescribed prayers, we are recognizing or we're acknowledging the lordship of God. Okay, so lordship, for my own humble understanding, I think lordship means the God's sovereignty over the universe. Okay, so when you perform the prescribed prayers, you are recognizing God's sovereignty over the universe. Okay, and that turns the other actions that you do in this life into a form of worship, okay? But once again, with sincerity, right? Well, the intention with which you're performing the prayers, okay? That's really important. Your intention is important. And it turns into a form of worship because all the other actions that you do, right, that you might be just doing for worldly purposes, end up having the primary intention, right, which is doing it for God, okay? When you're doing those other actions in life, you're doing it for the sake of God, okay? You don't want to be engaging in trivial activities that is no benefit to people, or that is not done for the sake of God, okay? So for example, even when you're writing a novel, okay? So even when you're writing a novel, like let's say people don't like thinking about death or existential questions, okay? Some people just want to live a hedonist life, okay? They don't want to think about death, okay? But let's say you write a novel which makes them ask these questions, okay? The book explores themes of death and mortality, okay? And it makes people like, it awakens them. It makes them ask these questions. Even this would be considered an act of worship, okay? So performing the prescribed prayers turns everything else we do into a form of worship. If you remember, the first servant who spent his money wisely, remember, what did he do? The first servant, sorry for my handwriting, he invests a small amount of money. He invests a small amount of his money. He invests a small amount. So he spends a small amount and invests it, and his capital ends up increasing. So you can think of that as someone who spends just some of his time performing the prescribed prayers. And by performing the prescribed prayers, everything else he also does becomes a form of worship, okay? Because remember, the servant, he invests a little, his capital increases, okay? Even though he invests a little, we invest a little time performing the prescribed prayers, everything else that we do turns into a form of worship, and our capital increases, okay? Our capital increases. So, and I think this is the final sentence of the Risale-i Nur, saying here of this chapter, he can make over the whole capital of his life to the hereafter in this way. So he can make all the actions he does do in this world, striving for the afterlife. So even when you do something that might not be considered like religious, like maybe let's say you're reading a book, or like let's say you're eating food, even these can become forms of worship, and it can be for the hereafter, okay? You can be rewarded in the hereafter, okay? But also like in the hereafter. And he can make his transient life permanent in one respect. So remember, we have limited time, okay? This life is transient, but by performing the prescribed prayers, we can also turn all of the transient actions that we do in this life permanent in a certain aspect, because they are done for the sake of God, okay? They're done for the sake of God. They turn into a form of worship, okay? Now, I know this video has become extremely long, but I hope you're able to benefit from this video, brothers and sisters, and inshallah, I will see you guys next time.